All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, I want to tell all of you thank you for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak. But as we always say here at Chin Check Sports Radio, we do this because we love it, as we are simply sharing our passions with you all as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. Well, this brings us to the finality, the conclusion of our top 10 Chin Check Sports Radio boxing upsets and worst decisions of all time. Folks, this is actually one of the hardest lists that we have ever done. Trying to think of the fights that were bad decisions, going back and we watching all those fights. Basically, in some cases, even though it was a controversial decision, but we actually agreed with the person that won the fight. We broke down our scoring criteria. If you go back to the first broadcast that we did, we broke down, the different scoring criteria, what judges look for, and also understanding that we also once was in training to become a boxing judge back in our home state of New Jersey. And understand it's not as easy, or judges might see things that the average fan might not see kind of sitting up close. And then we broke it down to fights where, it was a close decision, but we kind of see why it's a bad decision. And then as we got higher up on the list, these are decisions like what the hell were the judges looking at, and of course the magnitude of the fight. So when we came up with this list, and by the way, even coming up with the list was really about ranking these actual fights itself. But when we were first approached with this topic, the very first fight that we thought of was March 13th, 1999, Evander Holyfield, draw 12 against Lennox Lewis for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. The single most prized possession in professional sports, as folks say. And you had guys going for the undisputed crown. Oftentimes, because of boxing politics, titles and championships become splintered and fractured. You have this sanctioning organization has their champion. This organization has their champion. This organization has their champion. So people love a united champion, or a unified champion rather, especially in the heavyweight division. So March 13th, 1999, Evander Holyfield, 36-3, 25 KOs against Lennox Lewis, 34-1 and 27 KOs. But we have to give the backstory on both fighters. Evander Holyfield, some notable fights in his career. December of 1987. Let's go back. July of 1986. A split decision victory over longtime cruiserweight champion Dwight Muhammad Cowie. And that was in only Holyfield's 12th professional fight. Holyfield of 1984 Olympic team glory, which honestly is rather underlooked as one of the greatest Olympic boxing teams of all time. We have mentioned this before. You think of the 1976 boxing team with Sugar Ray Leonard and the Spinks brothers, but that 84 team, those boys were bad. Evander Holyfield, Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker, Meldrick Taylor. Those boys were the truth. And Holyfield received, in a horrible decision, won a bronze medal. So Evander Holyfield, again, December 1987, a KO in the 4th round against Dwight Muhammad Cowie. So Holyfield seeing richer prizes in the heavyweight division, again, becoming the undisputed cruiserweight champion, defeating Carlos De Leon. In April of 1988, decided to try his hand at the heavyweight division, slowly moving up, was always seen as a blown-up cruiserweight. But due to the tremendous upset of Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson in February of 1990, and Holyfield was actually in Tokyo for that fight. And what's funny, they interviewed Holyfield right before the fight, or right after the fight, and that was a marquee matchup that people wanted to see. You had Mike Tyson, seemingly invincible, against one Evander Holyfield, who was the undefeated cruiserweight champion and was now moving up to the heavyweight division. But as history will tell us, in perhaps the greatest boxing upset, in the greatest boxing upset of all times, and one of the greatest upsets of sports history, Buster Douglas as a 42-1 underdog, knocking out Mike Tyson. So Evander Holyfield, he gets the first crack at one Buster Douglas on October 25th, 1990, in a KO in the third round, in which he boxed beautifully for 2 rounds and landed a nice, beautiful counter right hand to wrestle the heavyweight championship away from one James Buster Douglas, which began the reign of Evander Holyfield. And in that fight, Evander Holyfield won the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF heavyweight titles. His first title defense, April of 1991, against George Foreman. Yes, that George Foreman, who was a former heavyweight champion of the world in the 1970s by defeating Joe Frazier, beat up Ken Norton, lost to Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle, had a series of comeback fights and worked his way up to become a contender for the championship in a very tough decision. Evander Holyfield clearly won that fight. November of 1991, a TKO in the 7th round against the late smoking Burt Cooper. Evander Holyfield was knocked down in the 3rd round, came back. I thought it was actually tied around despite winning it. Despite being knocked down, because usually in a knockdown you scored a 10-8 round, but I thought Holyfield did enough to rock Burt Cooper and really could have really pulled it in a 10-9 round. And Holyfield pretty much was fighting Burt Cooper's fighting in his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, and actually a very, very exciting fight. June of 1992, a unanimous decision victory over former heavyweight champion of the world, Larry Holmes. November of 1992, a unanimous decision loss to Riddick Bowe in a classic fight. Folks, go back and watch that fight. Those guys fought their asses off from the first round until the last round. Ironically, that's when people became fans of Holyfield in this particular loss. Again, he was seen as a guy that was really holding on to a title that still belonged to Mike Tyson. He was seen as a blown-up cruiserweight. When he fought Buster Douglas and knocked Douglas out in the 3rd round, people said, well, Mike Tyson hit him harder than that, and he tried to diminish his win against Douglas by saying that Douglas was vastly overweight and out of shape, which he was, but that's Douglas's problem. Again, you know the famous story with Douglas training. His mom had died and he had no fear of Tyson. Tyson maybe taking training a little bit lax and resulting in his loss. So people try to minimize Evander Holyfield's greatness. And in a loss, ironically, is when he started gaining the respect of fans and the boxing community. In a comeback fight, June of 1993, defeated one Alex Stewart. November of 1993, won the heavyweight title back from one Riddick Bowe. Now, in the first Bowe fight, Holyfield was a unified champion. He lost the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF heavyweight titles. In November of 93, a year later, he only won the WBA and the IBF. Now go back to one Riddick Bowe throwing the WBC belt in the trash rather than fighting one Lennox Lewis. So kind of keep that in mind. In a great fight, actually in terms of boxing performances, probably Holyfield's best performances, having Emmanuel Stewart in his corner, adopting a different tactical strategy, boxing and moving, the famous fan man that flew into the ring. I couldn't believe it watching that fight as a young man. So definitely a great win for Evander Holyfield. In April of 1994, losing the heavyweight championship by majority decision to one Michael Moore, and Michael Moore becoming the first Southpaw heavyweight champion. May of 1995, a unanimous decision over Ray Mercer, Merciless Ray Mercer, a tough heavyweight contender. November of 1995, a TKO loss in the 8th round to one Riddick Bowe. So again, Riddick Bowe took 2 out of 3. He took 2 out of 3 against Evander Holyfield. And in that fight, if you go back and watch the HBO series Legendary Fights or Legendary Nights, Evander Holyfield stated that he had heart problems and the heart wasn't well. And he went to a doctor, and the doctor told him he had contracted, I believe, hepatitis A or C, and he would fight energy spurts. He actually scored a knockdown of Riddick Bowe. That's the funny part. He scored a knockdown of Riddick Bowe, which I believe was Bowe's first knockdown as a professional. But again, as you saw, his energy levels continued to go up and go down, peaks and valleys, and was TKO'd in the 8th round. People thought Holyfield was a shot fighter. May of 96, a decision in 5 rounds against former Showtime announcer Bobby Chiz. In November of 1996, a TKO victory in the 11th round against Iron Mike Tyson. We have mentioned this before about this fight. Tyson was a huge favorite going into this fight. Again, people thought that Holyfield was a shot fighter after the Riddick Bowe fight. Mike Tyson, fresh out of prison, fought 4 fights, won the WBA heavyweight championship in the KO1 in the first round against Bruce Seldon, which is ironically that same night that Tupac Shakur was killed, and Mike Tyson and Tupac were very good friends. And people thought that it was going to be a death sentence for one Holyfield, considering his bad heart and the beating he took against Riddick Bowe. Really didn't look that good against Bobby Chiz. So when the fight first happened, I believe it went from a 25-1 odds in favor of Tyson down 9-1. I believe by the time he walked into the ring, the odds were either 9-1 or 6-1, which are pretty big odds. To put it into perspective, when Sonny Liston fought Cassius Clay, who will go on to become Muhammad Ali, that fight was an 8-1 favorite in Sonny Liston's favor. So, and that's considered one of the biggest upsets of boxing history. So this fight should be the same. In the rematch, June of 1997, Mike Tyson DQ for biting Evander Holyfield, which is still to this day one of the most bizarre acts in boxing history. November of 1997, beat Michael Moore in a rematch to win the IBF Heavyweight Championship of the World. So again, beating Mike Tyson, he regains the WBA Heavyweight Championship of the World. Beating Michael Moore, he wins the IBF Heavyweight Championship of the World, or regains it. And in September of 1998, fights Vaughn Bean back in his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, to retain his championship. Lennox Lewis, from 1992 Olympic glory, winning a gold medal, beating the aforementioned Riddick Bowe in the gold medal round. So let's jump into some notable fights in the career of one Lennox Lewis. Beat Tyrell Biggs, a TKO in the 3rd round in November of 1991. And understand this, as Lewis is basically in finishing school in the Olympics in 1992, Mike Tyson has already lit the world on fire. There was a famous saying that I don't want to say famous, but the story of Mike Tyson and Lennox Lewis sparring as teenagers, and there is a picture that you probably Google that online. So Mike Tyson was setting the world on fire. Evander Holyfield has already had his first fight with Riddick Bowe. So by the time where you figure around the time where these people were hitting the scene, again, Holyfield becoming heavyweight champion of the world, knocking out Buster Douglas. Lewis was still in finishing school. So, no, I'm sorry. I said 92, the 1988 Olympic boxing team. So we'll say it again. At Chin Check Sports Radio, of course, we will always say that we'll make mistakes. Lennox Lewis was part of the 1988 Olympic boxing team for Canada, again, of Jamaican ancestry, of British descent, and fighting for Canada. In 1988, we'll say it again for the listeners, in 1988, Lewis won the gold medal, beating Riddick Bowe. So in 1992, on Halloween, a TKO in the 2nd round, and we definitely remember watching that fight as a little kid, against Donovan Razor Ruddock. Donovan Razor Ruddock, who gave Mike Tyson 2 tough fights, and those were the last fights that Tyson fought before he was sent to prison. May of 1993, a unanimous decision over Tony TNT Tucker. October of 1993, a TKO in the 7th round against Frank Bruno. In September of 1994. Now, let's go back here. After the Ruddock fight, remember we talked about that Riddick Bowe decided to throw away the WBC belt in the trash. So when Riddick Bowe fought Evander Holyfield in November 13th of 1992, Lewis ideally was supposed to face the winner of that fight because he just beat a top contender in Donovan Razor Ruddock. Again, Lewis won the WBA and the IBF. Lewis decided to throw the WBC belt in the garbage, and that's a famous video that you all can look it up, with his former manager, Rock Newman. So he throws the belt in the trash. The belt is then awarded to one Lennox Lewis. So Lewis now is the WBC champion, again, with victories over Tony Tucker, Frank Bruno, Phil Jackson, May of 1994. In September of 1994, Lewis is shockingly knocked out in the 2nd round against Oliver McCall in London, England, losing the WBC championship. So Lewis, of course, has to fall back to the pack. Storms back with victories over the late Tommy Morrison, the Tommy Morrison who starred in the Rocky V movie as Tommy the Machine Gun in October of 1995. A tough majority decision Very close decision, and this kind of made an honorable mention about questionable decisions or controversial decisions. In Ray Mercer in Madison Square Garden, a very, very tough fight, and a very exciting fight too, by the way. In February of 1997, the WBC belt now is vacant, and he regains his championship by beating the guy who knocked him out 3 years prior, one Oliver McCall. Now, what's funny about that fight, and a lot of people forget, and it's a famous image, and one of the saddest images in boxing, of Oliver McCall having an emotional breakdown in the ring and crying, and people thought he cried and quit the fight. Well, people forget he was only 6 to 8 weeks out of drug rehab. Clearly, the man shouldn't have been in the ring. I mean, that's just, for people who do combat sports, know that your mind has to be in the right place to train, to adopt strategy, okay, to be tough, and the man clearly should not have been in the ring boxing. So February 1997, a TKO in the 5th round when Oliver McCall just stopped boxing and had an emotional breakdown in the ring. But again, the man was 6 to 8 weeks out of drug rehab. July of 1997, a disqualification win over a Henry Akinwande for excessive holding. October of 1997, a KO in the 1st round against Andrew Golota. Now, what's funny, but Andrew Golota is the same guy who pretty much retired Riddick Bowe. In March of 1998, TKO, actually in a pretty exciting fight against Shannon Briggs. Now, Shannon Briggs was seen as the same Shannon Briggs who you see on YouTube fighting with everybody tomorrow, some Let's Go champ. The same Shannon Briggs who was the Lennox heavyweight champion when you follow lineage. What do I mean by that, Chin Check? Shannon Briggs beat George Foreman. George Foreman was the Lennox heavyweight champion of the world. You know how to explain Lennox championships online. Line of succession. We mentioned that when Mike Tyson beat Buster Douglas. Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. We'll say this again. Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. Evander Holyfield beat Buster Douglas. Michael Moore. Okay, then Riddick Bowe beat Evander Holyfield. Evander Holyfield won a rematch to beat Bowe. That is a lineage of the heavyweight championship of the world. Panoply of championship titles be damned. So, Evander Holyfield then loses to Michael Moore, if you follow the line of the heavyweight championship. Then George Foreman knocks out Michael Moore in our Chin Check and one of our greatest Chin Check Sports Radio upsets of all time. Please check that out. Then Shannon Briggs beats George Foreman. So if you follow the line or lineage, Shannon Briggs was the Lennox heavyweight champion of the world. Then Lennox Lewis, as we talked about, knocks out Shannon Briggs in 5 rounds. So you can make an argument that Lewis is the Lennox heavyweight champion of the world and also having the WBC belt. And he fought another fighter in September of 98 against a unknown challenger and wins in 12 rounds. So now the stage is set for this unification fight in Madison Square Garden. These great champions. Again, now, I would have to say, reading Holyfield's resume, even though Lewis was the gold medalist, Lewis was the WBC champion, Lewis was the Lennox champion, and we looked online to find it, and we really couldn't find the odds. But we would have to believe that Holyfield had to be the favorite going to this fight. Why? He was more battle-tested. He fought wars against Mike Tyson, Riddick Bowe, George Foreman, Michael Moore. So Holyfield was seen as a more battle-tested fighter, where Lewis, if you take away the Ray Mercer fight that some people might argue whether he deserved to win, he was knocked out in his previous big championship fight against one Oliver McCall. So I'm sure there were questions, even though Lewis was the bigger, stronger athlete with a better jab. If I can go back in time, I'm pretty sure a lot of ring experts chose Holyfield because Holyfield, at that time, even though he still is, but he was a warrior at that time. He's been through wars. He knew how to push the pace. He definitely knew how to push big men. So I'm pretty sure that Holyfield had to be the betting favorite, and by slight betting odds based on the experience and his resume. So Evander Holyfield stated that he had a 3rd round prophecy. He was going to dominate the first 2 rounds and knock out Lennox Lewis in the 3rd round. In the first 2 rounds, Lewis came out with his jab. And in the 2nd round, actually at the 227 mark, had Holyfield in a little bit of trouble. In the 3rd round, you clearly saw Holyfield trying to fulfill the prophecy, pretty much opened up on Lewis. Now, in the first little bit of that round, You clearly saw Lewis, I thought, was actually winning until Holyfield buckled him a little bit with a short left hook on the inside. And you could tell Lewis was a little bit rocked, and Holyfield pretty much emptied out his gas tank trying to knock Lewis out. We thought Lewis fought competitively, but just the sheer aggression of Holyfield, landing the cleaner, harder punches, we felt that he won the third round. Folks, in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round, you give them a clean sweep to one Lennox Lewis. In the 5th round, we felt that Lewis, if he wanted to, could have knocked Holyfield out, where he had Holyfield trapped against the ropes. He had him rocked. He had him hurt. He had him hurt bad. I mean, jab after jab, hard right hand. There was another sequence in one of the rounds where the two of them got tangled up. I believe it was the 7th round they got tangled up. They fell to the ground. And right as referee said break, Holyfield lands a nice hard right hand and then a left hook to the body, a right hook to the body, which froze Holyfield right in his tracks. So it was sustained dominance, pretty much using his jab. That was a Lewis staple, was his jab in his right hand, having Emmanuel Stewart in his corner. Again, the 4th through the 8th round, you clearly give it to Lewis. The 9th round, I gave it to Lewis. The 10th round, you give that to Holyfield, just pretty much based on Lewis's inactivity and Holyfield doing better comparative to the other rounds. So it wasn't like Holyfield dominated Lewis in that round. It's that Holyfield did better and Lewis, he just wasn't active enough. In the 11th round, you give that to Lewis. And go back and watch that fight between the 11th and the 12th round. As Lewis walks back to the corner, he knows he has his fight won. He puts his fist in the air, and Emmanuel Stewart, the late Emmanuel Stewart, sits him down, gets on him, tells him, hey, man, you're almost giving these rounds away. You can knock him out if you sit down in your punches. You're doing this silly shit right here. Just let the right hand go and stop doing it. Go back and watch the Mike Tyson fight when Lewis was doing the same thing and Emmanuel Stewart went off on him in the 5th round. So just kind of funny when you watch that. And definitely want to say rest in power to Emmanuel Stewart. To me, the greatest boxing trainer of our lifetime. We definitely enjoy watching him teach boxing. This man truly understood the sport of boxing. So, folks, watching this fight, you can only give Evander Holyfield at the most 3 rounds. And even that 3rd round, which would be the 9th round, would be debatable. The only rounds you can truly give Holyfield are the 3rd and the 10th round. And again, the 10th round, he won the round. Wasn't anything spectacular that he did or didn't do. He just did better in the previous rounds, and Lewis decided to take the round off. The 3rd round is a round that you can say Holyfield clearly won that round by landing harder, effective punches that rocked his opponent. So, when the decision was about to be read, everybody just figured that Lennox Lewis has just now become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The unified, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. You knew it and you felt it. Until you saw the first scorecard read by Judge Eugenia Williams that had it 115, 113 for Evander Holyfield. And folks, you see the look on Lewis's face when he turns his head like, by 115, 113 means you gave 7 rounds to Evander Holyfield and only 5 to Lennox Lewis. There is no way you can watch that fight and have it give 7 rounds to Evander Holyfield. Folks, there is just no way. Then you hear another judge scored 115, 113 for Lewis. Okay, a little, not even that close, but he scored it. And the other judge scored the fight a draw. Folks, when that decision was read, you heard the boos from the crowd. You heard the HBO team of Jim Lampley, Larry Merchant, George Foreman in utter shock, in utter disdain. They called it a travesty, and it was disgusting, folks. Even going back and watching that fight recently, I'm still amazed how the judges came to that conclusion. It was truly disgusting, to the point where Lewis just exited the ring. Emmanuel Stewart did the post-fight interview. Now, Lewis, he kind of should have stayed and talked, but I get it. You know, you're fighting for the single most important prize in the world, and that's a heavyweight championship of the world. And to have it taken from you like that, where you fought a great fight. Now, do I think Lewis could have actually stepped on the gas pedal a little bit more? Do I think he actually could have been a little bit more aggressive instead of dropping his hands and showboating? Yes, absolutely. But it still does not negate the fact that Lewis won this fight and won it by a very, very, very wide margin. Again, 10 rounds to 2, or at most 9 rounds to 3. Folks, that would have been a 117, 111 card or 118, 110 scorecard. How the hell did that lady come up with 7 rounds to give Evander Holyfield? Ain't no way in hell. They just don't win. You can make an argument between the first and the second fight. You've been hard pressed to give Holyfield 7 rounds in both fights. So there's just no way. Again, this is why this fight is scored so high. Again, based on the fighters, what was at stake, the magnitude of the fight, and quite frankly, what the hell the judges were watching. And this fight was the first fight that we thought of when we thought to do this list. Now, what was the aftermath? They fought a rematch in November. A little bit more competitive fight from Holyfield's perspective, but Lewis clearly won that fight, became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And Lewis, and again, he is our top 4 fighter of all time that we grew up watching. We did a whole broadcast on him, so please check it out. Again, Lee, we definitely hope that you enjoyed the list, as we hope the rest of you did. Again, we take any suggestions for our programming, our content. We love what we do. If you have anything, you can definitely reach out to us at chinchecksportsradio@gmail.com. Once again, our email address is chinchecksportsradio@gmail.com. Until the next time, we are signing out.